Here's a brief clip from President Biden talking about the importance of democracy.
I stand before you now on this August night to report that democracy has prevailed. Democracy has delivered. And now democracy must be preserved.
Joe Walsh, what do you make of the messaging that we heard from the president tonight?
I'm so glad, Brandis, that Joe Biden sticks with this defending democracy theme. He was told in 2022 avoid it. His consultants told him to do that. He ignored them. He emphasized that Trump is a threat to democracy. The Democrats had a good midterm. They avoided the big red wave. If this election is about Donald Trump, and think about this, somebody's going to lose in November. If Kamala Harris loses, she will publicly concede, she'll congratulate Trump, and she'll participate in the peaceful transfer of power. If Donald Trump loses, he'll do none of that. I think Kamala Harris needs to follow suit with what Biden's done and continue to talk about this issue of democracy.
First off tonight, Kamala Harris is encouraging a peaceful transfer of power as she concedes the race for president to Donald Trump. President-elect Trump's victory marks a sweeping political comeback for a candidate who refused to accept defeat 4 years ago, was convicted on felony charges, and survived 2 assassination attempts. The defeat leaves Democrats, though, to pick up the pieces and figure out a path forward for their party. Here with their reactions are Patrick Hanley, co-founder of Operation Swing State, Michelle Duster, author, historian, and great-granddaughter of Ida B. Wells, Santita Jackson, host of The Santita Jackson Show, and Devin Jones, Republican committeeman of the 18th Ward and chairman of the South Side Republicans. Welcome all of you to Chicago Tonight Black Voices, or welcome back. I know we've seen all of you before. What did you hear, as obviously the co-founder of the organization, and therefore you spent a lot of time in Michigan and Wisconsin. Sure. What did you hear from those voters?
So a lot of what we heard throughout the cycle was a deep distaste for President Trump, but a stronger, perhaps, frustration with pocketbook issues. I mean, when prices are up 20% in 4 years, that hits in a way that even topics that are so important to us, like democracy, just don't touch.
First off tonight, Donald J. Trump was sworn in as the 47th president of the United States today. He's kicking off his second term with plans to sign dozens of executive orders ranging from increasing domestic energy production, ending diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and clamping down on border crossings.
All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came.
Here with more on Trump's plans are Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, a Democrat whose district includes Chicago's northwest side and western suburbs. On Zoom, Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat whose district includes Chicago's north side and some northwest suburbs. And Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, a Democrat whose district includes some southwest suburbs. We also invited all the Republicans in Illinois' congressional delegation, but they either declined or have not responded to our requests.
I think President Trump is going to quickly confront the reality that his very expensive plans for completely throwing out the activities along the southern border to detain hundreds of thousands of migrants, to immediately begin deportation flights, which the American taxpayers would be paying for, will run into some pretty significant budgetary realities, while he also wants to enact his tax cuts for the billionaires. So, I think that the Trump administration and the Republicans in the House and Senate are going to have to all get on the same page.
President Trump's move to do away with diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in the federal government has also made waves in the public and private sector. Companies like Walmart, Target, and McDonald's recently moved to abandon their DEI initiatives. Backers of Trump's decision say these practices were discriminatory and promoted inequity. But advocates argue social equity initiatives are essential to create a fair and balanced society. Here with more on DEI initiatives are Xavier Ramey, CEO of Justice Informed, a social impact consulting firm, and on Zoom, Jacob Hubert, president of the Liberty Justice Center.
Partly because I think they believe things that, like what Mr. Hubert just said. They think the DEI is about creating these check boxes and giving unqualified people jobs. They think that DEI is about training people to hate. And the reality is that most people don't even know how to love. What we're teaching them is how to include persons that they most likely don't live around. The reality is most white Americans do not live around an African American. And most African Americans don't live around persons who are of Indian descent. We are a segregated country. And in order to actually create a space that is equal, when we come into an integrated space, such as the workplace, and the workplace is the most integrated space for the majority of Americans, not their homes, then we have to do the work of understanding how to teach them to do the work of integration, to live up to those values that the Constitution says, which is that we are not only all created equal, but we are to be treated equally. We're not training people or teaching people to hate. We're not using race as a straw man. What we're doing is letting people know that you don't know what race is and how it's affected people. I would challenge Jacob to consider, why is it that there are less than 5% of the partners in major law firms across the United States who are African American? And why are the majority of them white men?
President Donald Trump's flurry of executive orders includes rolling back protections for transgender people. Advocates are pushing back, saying there could be a domino effect of widespread consequences. Here with more are Shannon Parker, CEO of Brave Space Alliance, Alethea Zamatakis, Research Assistant Professor at the Institute for Sexual and Gender Minority Health and Wellbeing at Northwestern University, and on Zoom, Precious Brady Davis, a commissioner for the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Chicago. The trans community, fairly small, making up only 1% of our entire population. Commissioner, why do you think this administration sees this community as a threat?
I think that we as trans people, that we make up 1% of the population, as you say, approximately 3 million Americans. Does that mean that our lives don't matter? Approximately 3 million people live in the state of Iowa, and I find it as a distraction. I think it's really a distraction about the 1% who this president is catering to.
Black women have the highest maternal mortality rate in the U.S. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Black women are 2.5 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women. A new state law aims to remedy that by expanding insurance coverage during and after pregnancy. Carrie, I want to come to you because the maternal mortality rate for Black women in the U.S. was 49.5 deaths per 100,000 live births, and that was in 2022. The CDC says this rate is, as we mentioned, 3 times higher than that of white women. What do we know about the causes of this disparity?
You know, there's a lot of causes. There are clinical causes, you know, hypertension, postpartum hemorrhage, you know, sepsis, but the one cause is racism. And we're not speaking about that as much as we should, the other topics. And so, you know, we're putting programs in place around the city to really highlight the importance of caring for the Black and brown community the proper way. And, you know, unfortunately, that rate in the city of Chicago is 5 to 6 times higher.
Chicago is the step-in capital of the world. That's if you ask the godfather of step-in himself, DJ Sam Chatman, who's credited with coining the term. And though the dance craze's popularity has spread across the country, no one can do it quite like the hometown originators. This Black History Month, we take a look at the culture and history of step-in. A woman fondly known as Black Mary Harris hosted step-in events for more than 60 years. At 17 years old, she says she became a residential sweetheart for a social club, and the environment inspired her to host her own parties.
We almost got shut down. It took me almost 4 years to get one party off the ground, and look what that party has turned into. We're all over the world now.
Harris says hosting a Steppers event doesn't require much, but a few essentials.
The music had to be off the chain, and the venue had to be bathrooms, good parking, and a good dance floor. Back in the day when we learned to dance, it was always, if the man could do it, I could do it.
Sunny day sweeping the clouds away. That's how Sonia Manzano spent her career for more than 4 decades. The actress hung out with Big Bird, Oscar the Grouch, and the whole gang when she played Maria on the beloved program Sesame Street. Manzano was recently in Chicago, where she spoke with Chicago Commons and supporters about the importance of early childhood education. We sat down with her while she was in town and took a trip down memory lane. What was the importance of your role on Sesame Street at the time? Because there was not a lot of Latino representation on television.
I loved the show even before I was on it. I saw it at the Student Union of Carnegie Mellon University. I walked in and there was a very bald, very young James Earl Jones reciting the alphabet. I said, what is this? I thought it was a show that taught lip reading because, you know, he's very deliberate, A, B, C, as he is. Yes. The letters flashed over his head. I said, what the heck is this? When I saw Susan and Gordon, this beautiful African-American couple, I was stunned because at that time you did not see people of color on television, and if you did, they weren't the beautiful Susan and Gordon, and they certainly weren't any Latinos. And I was born and raised in the Bronx, watching a lot of television and wondering how could I contribute to a society that didn't see me.
Chicago is known as the birthplace of house music, and a local artist is now making a very public tribute to the beloved genre. The new mural is set to be unveiled at the Chicago Public Library's Uptown branch across the street from the now closed Gherkin Records. We caught up with the artist, Max Sansing, while he was putting the finishing touches on the artwork honoring the genre's influence and one of its pioneers.
Kind of like the portrait that I chose was mainly something where he's at peace and caught up in the reverence of his legacy. I've watched and listened to his music. I watched documentaries and pieces on him and stuff like that. I want the piece to make people feel happy and joyous, the same way the music makes people feel.
Elements of Chicago culture are built on some of the city's most famous foods: deep dish pizza, Italian beef, and of course, the classic Chicago-style hot dog. Now, a local entrepreneur is putting all of those flavors in the bag and adding a little crunch to the city's food scene.
Chicago food is so much more than just the food. We wanted to give it a personality, like walking on a happy, bright Chicago summer day. Like that was sort of the feeling we were going for.
The cartoon designs and creative flavors are popping up across Chicago's neighborhoods.
We started in 7 and we've already grown to 17, which has been a whirlwind 3.5 weeks.
Latinos make up the second largest racial group in Chicago, with nearly 30% of the city's population identifying as Hispanic or Latino, according to the 2020 census. But advocates say the impact they've had in Chicago isn't well represented in historical records. One group is working to fix that by creating their own space for Latinos to share their histories.
Our approach is, I think, a bit unique, right? For one, we want to make sure that we make accessible all the archives that they're already out there and they exist. So we want to build a directory so that those become accessible, so that folks know, go to our website, you find out about everything that is already available and out there, whether you're a student, a researcher, or an artist, or someone who wants to learn about their neighborhood. But we also want to work with Latino organizations for them to be able to have the capacity and the resources to do their own archiving. So that's where the coalition comes in, and professional development and resources, partnerships and collaborations, and then of course storytelling projects to address a lot of the interests, needs, but also gaps in the stories that are really not known or understood or sometimes generalized.
A Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, editor, columnist, PBS NewsHour political analyst, and MSNBC host lays it all bare in his new book. Jonathan Capehart shares his life story in the memoir, Yet Here I Am, Lessons from a Black Man's Search for Home. The recounted stories of his upbringing and career illustrate the challenges with embracing his identity and finding his voice. He's found them both, and he shares them with us now. Jonathan Capehart is in town for the Chicago Humanities Festival. Welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices.
Thank you very much, Brandis. And so I thought if ever I had the opportunity to write a memoir, that I would do the same thing. I would be open and honest and raw as I could be about certainly my successes, but most definitely about my shortcomings and my failures, because that's where the lessons come in. That's where people connect and see maybe a part of themselves, even if they're not Black or even if they're not LGBTQ, certainly in the way that I felt a connection to Kay Graham, and I'm nothing like her.
First off tonight, President Donald Trump is facing backlash from his supporters over his administration's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files. The fallout comes following congressional Republicans' success in clawing back funds from foreign aid and public media and the passage of the president's so-called Big Beautiful Bill. But Democrats are sounding the alarm on the impact of spending cuts. Here with more is Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth. Senator, thank you for joining us. Last week, Congress approved the president's requested rescission bill, rescinding funding that Congress itself already approved. First time this has happened since the 90s under President Bill Clinton. Are you concerned about a slippery slope where potentially a Republican-controlled Congress becomes sort of a rubber stamp for the Republican president?
Oh, it's not a slippery slope. We're there. We're there already. You have Republicans who are basically doing whatever the president tells them that he wants them to do, even when it hurts their constituents. Remember that they just passed a piece of legislation that cuts funding for Medicaid, funding that in Illinois is going to mean about 500,000 Illinoisans are going to lose health coverage. The funding cut that they passed, that's going to mean that about 9 rural hospitals in Illinois will shut down. 93 nursing homes are in danger of being shut down. Over 470,000 Illinoisans might lose SNAP benefits, food assistance for children. Whether it's Trump's illegal funding freeze or him empowering unelected bureaucrats to take a chainsaw to our nation's budget, he's already doing it. And this Republican-controlled Congress, this House and Senate, are just rubber stamping whatever he wants to do.
Today, Vice President J.D. Vance was in Indiana to discuss getting that state to redraw its own congressional maps. There are reports that the White House is also eyeing Ohio for this same attempt to pick up more Republican seats in the House. I mean, is this a slippery slope if Democrats respond by redrawing their maps to increase the number of Democratic seats?
Not looking to do that, and I agree with Governor Pritzker that is not our intent, but we're going to be mindful of all the options. What's at the bottom of this? What is the base of this? The base of it is that Donald Trump realizes what he's done so far, his legislative agenda, is wildly unpopular, and he's facing an election contest in just a few months as candidates are being chosen and filing for office. He's trying to buy an insurance policy, go to the friendliest states he can find, and up the number in the Republican majority so it's easier for him to hang on to Congress. I don't think it's going to work. But I'll tell you, I understand the sentiment that Governor Pritzker expresses. We're not going to sit here and be taken for patsies.